The gap you feel when you price an artificial intelligence cluster in China today is not a feature preference or a product roadmap decision. It is a concession. On May 21, 2026, Jensen Huang told CNBC that Nvidia had largely conceded the Chinese market. That sentence from the founder of the firm that built the dominant position is a harder reading than any analyst estimate issued in the same quarter. 4 days later, on May 25, 2026, Huawei published what it calls the Tau scaling law, asserting that intelligence per watt can keep compounding on domestically produced silicon. This script measures one metric across those 4 days: the share of advanced artificial intelligence accelerator revenue flowing to Nvidia inside China. From the era when Nvidia was the only viable supplier to the morning, a CEO used the word conceded on camera. The bridge between those two dates is short in calendar time and enormous in competitive distance. The readings are near total dominance through roughly 2022 and largely conceded by May 2026. The gap between those two readings is the story. Before 2023, no domestic alternative existed at the scale Chinese hyperscalers required for serious artificial intelligence training workloads. Nvidia's hardware was the procurement default, the engineering assumption, and the infrastructure on which the bulk of Chinese cloud artificial intelligence capacity was being built. The question of domestic alternatives was real but secondary. Huawei's Ascend line existed on paper and in limited deployment, but it was a hedge, a compliance gesture against a risk that had not yet arrived with full force: near total dominance. No domestic alternative at scale. That was the then reading. The first export control tier arrived in 2022, restricting the most capable chips. Then a second tier, then a third. Each round of controls targeted the product Nvidia had most recently configured to stay inside the permitted performance envelope. The H100 was restricted. The A100 was restricted. A compliant variant was developed, and then that too was restricted before it could accumulate a customer base large enough to create durable loyalty. Each restriction wave did something the policymakers designing it may not have fully modeled. It converted what had been an optional domestic procurement preference into a technical necessity. Chinese cloud providers could not build export-compliant artificial intelligence capacity on Nvidia silicon even if they preferred to. The restriction removed the choice. That removal was the mechanism. Think of a river rerouted by a dam. The dam does not stop the water, it redirects it. Each successive export restriction was a dam segment added to the same wall. The water, meaning Chinese procurement budgets, engineering talent, and government mandate, did not stop moving. It found Huawei's channel instead. By May 2026, enough segments were in place that Jensen Huang could see the new riverbed from the outside and name what he saw. That is what happened between 2022 and May 21, 2026. The Ascend line absorbed the procurement pipeline that would have kept Chinese buyers inside the Nvidia ecosystem. Each time a restriction landed, enterprise customers who had been waiting for a compliant Nvidia product were pushed into Huawei's sales cycle instead. Huawei's customer relationships deepened. Integration work accumulated. Software stacks were tuned against Huawei's architecture. The switching costs that had previously favored Nvidia's ecosystem began accumulating in the opposite direction. By early 2026, analyst estimates, and these should be treated as estimates rather than confirmed revenue figures because no Chinese hyperscaler publishes chip-level procurement data, placed Huawei's Ascend line as the primary choice for new domestic artificial intelligence infrastructure deployments. From hedge to primary supplier, the procurement hierarchy inverted. The exact proportion that Huawei now commands carries real measurement uncertainty. Analysts construct their estimates from power draw reports, job postings, and procurement disclosures, each with its own reporting lag. The directional reading is robust. The precise share is a single firm estimate at best, and this script will not attach a specific percentage to it without a named source that can survive verification. What can be stated with precision is the direction. Ascend moved from secondary to primary, and that movement is visible in enough independent data streams to be directionally reliable even when the exact figure is contested. The language delta runs alongside the supply chain delta and is, in some ways, a more precise instrument. During 2023 earnings calls, Nvidia's public communications framed the China restrictions as a near-term revenue headwind with recoverable long-term potential. That framing held through multiple restriction cycles. It is the language a company uses when internal modeling still shows a viable path back to the market. It is the language of managed optimism. Then on May 21, 2026, Huang used the word conceded, past tense, unqualified, without a recovery clause attached. That shift in language from headwind to conceded is itself a data point. It represents the moment internal modeling aligned with public language. Executives manage word choice carefully through restriction cycles. The absence of a recovery qualifier after conceded signals that no near-term product path exists to change the reading. Conceded. That is the word. Not paraphrased, not softened. Huang said it on record on CNBC on May 21, 2026. It is attributable with confidence. A CEO concession is a harder data point than a market share estimate for a specific reason. Huang had every incentive to frame the situation as temporary or recoverable. He chose not to. That choice is a reading, and it comes from the person with the most complete internal data on Nvidia's China revenue. Analysts' share estimates carry wide error bars and lag by quarters. A founder's word choice in a live interview has no revision cycle. Conceded. 4 days after that word was spoken, Huawei published the Tao scaling law claim. The gap between the two events, 4 days, is itself a data point about how Huawei reads Western press cycles. The Tao scaling law is Huawei's own published assertion, not yet independently replicated or peer-reviewed as of this script. It is a company claim, and it should be held as such. It is not an established finding, and no independent test has confirmed its performance implications at scale. What can be observed is the timing. Huawei did not need to argue against Nvidia directly. Huang's language had already established the competitive context. The Tao claim lands as a forward-looking technical assertion into a news environment primed to receive it, because the most influential executive in the industry had spent the preceding 4 days establishing that the competitive landscape had shifted. Huawei's publication timing is a strategic act, and treating it as purely a technical announcement misses what the 4-day gap tells us about how Huawei understands the information environment it is operating in. Now read the mechanism against the intent. The export controls were designed to freeze Nvidia's Chinese competitors at a fixed capability ceiling. The mechanism was supply denial. Without access to leading-edge chips, the reasoning went, domestic development would plateau, and Chinese artificial intelligence capacity would remain dependent on whatever compliant variant Nvidia was permitted to sell. That reading was wrong. The controls did not freeze the ceiling. They accelerated the procurement mandates that were already present in Chinese industrial policy, consolidated Huawei's customer relationships at exactly the moment those relationships were most consequential, and removed the upgrade path that had kept Chinese buyers inside the Nvidia ecosystem. The instrument that was supposed to hold the reading is what moved it. Standard competitive analysis frames this outcome as Huawei gaining share. The more precise reading is that United States policy created the demand condition that no amount of Nvidia engineering could offset, because the restriction made Nvidia silicon technically unavailable for the workloads Chinese hyperscalers needed to run. This is not a story about superior Huawei engineering in isolation. It is a story about the interaction between the restriction and the procurement mandate the restriction created. Attach the right uncertainty to each of the 3 readings that converge here. The Ascend deployment estimates are directionally robust but numerically imprecise for the reasons already stated. The Tao scaling law is a company claim without independent replication. Huang's use of the word conceded reflects the framing pressure of a live interview as well as internal data. He may have been describing a specific product line segment rather than every corner of China artificial intelligence revenue. The quote should not be extended beyond what he said. Any single one of these 3 readings could carry measurement error. All 3 moving in the same direction, within the same week, is the signal the instrument is reading. When the word choice of the dominant firm's founder, the deployment estimates from the challenger's customer base, and a theoretical scaling claim from the challenger's research division all point the same way inside 4 days, the directional reading is not in serious doubt even if each individual data point carries its own tolerance. The metric moved from dominant supplier to public concession in roughly 4 years. That span is not long in the context of semiconductor industry cycles. A fabrication plant takes longer to permit and build than the interval in which Nvidia moved from sole supplier to largely conceded. The speed matters because it tells us something about the mechanism. This was not a gradual erosion driven by incremental Huawei improvements that eventually crossed a performance threshold. It was a structural reassignment of procurement. Each restriction wave pushed another tranche of Chinese enterprise customers into Huawei's sales pipeline at a moment when those customers had no alternative, and when Huawei had enough engineering depth to absorb them. The result is a market position that is not easily reversible by a product announcement, because the switching costs that once favored Nvidia's ecosystem have now been accumulating on the other side for more than 2 years. The wall did not hold the number. The chief executive of the firm that built the wall said so. The next dated reading the market is watching is end of 2027. That is the first cycle in which a China-compliant Nvidia product and a mature Ascend line would compete for the same enterprise procurement budget without the restriction removing one option before the competition can be measured. The question that reading will answer is whether any Nvidia China-compliant accelerator recovers measurable share, or whether conceded becomes the permanent label on this segment of the market. The delta will show first in procurement disclosures from Chinese hyperscalers across the next 2 earnings cycles. Those disclosures are thin and lagged, but they are the closest available instrument to the actual number. Watch for them. If you want the next reading when it lands, subscribe and turn on notifications. This channel reports the number, not the narrative around it.